Well, this is a very special episode of Fair Folk at Work. You know, Oftentimes at fair, you speak with people you've never met before or people you've only seen before. To test that hypothesis, my guest today I've never met or really talked with, but I've seen her on the streets. Welcome, Marilyn Letchworth, and welcome to Fair Folk at Work.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
I'm glad to have you here with me. So I'm going to start out with the traditional Fair Folk at Work question, which is, who was the person who said to you, there's this thing called fair, let's go check it out? And what did they say to get you to go out there?
Well, first of all, I've known about Commedia dell'arte my whole life since I was in, I think, middle school or something. But I had never, and I studied the characters and I loved the characters, but I never had a chance to do a show. And when I was in grad school, a guy by the name of Cab Covey approached me and he said, John Acorn is directing a Commedia dell'arte for the Renaissance Fair. Would you like to be in it? And he had told John about me and stuff. And so I said, of course, yes, I want to be in it. Because I had been to the fair before. Just, I don't even know who recommended. I think I just heard it through advertisements or whatever. I went when I was the beginning of graduate school. I was in graduate school for 4 years, by the way, because I was having a good time doing shows and stuff, and I loved my classes, and I loved my teachers, I loved all the other actors, and so I just stayed as long as I could till I finally had to take the test because I'd done everything else, and then I and
I'm
then I
familiar with that phenomenon. What was the graduate program?
San Francisco State University, and it was in theater, so I got my master's degree there in theater, got my BA at UCB, which is not a good theater school. I was so happy to be at State. But back to the Renaissance Fair thing. So I was really, really happy to be with Theater of Marvels, which is what John Acorn's Commedia was. John Acorn, I'm sure you've heard of him. He's a big name in Commedia dell'arte circles, and he's a wonderful guy. I learned so much from him. I was in a show with him and Wayne Grace, who's another well-known name, and Cab Covey and those guys. And so I just had the best time working with them and rehearsing, and I loved doing the show. And that was my first Commedia dell'arte show and my first performance at the Northern Fair, and that was in the mid 70s. And from then on, I was off and running, and I ended up at South Coast Repertory Theater several years later, I guess late 70s, down south. I was a member of that company for a while, and so I wasn't doing a lot of things like Commedia. I was doing real theater, but I mean, not that Commedia isn't theater, but to me it's play. So there I was, and we had a group that the repertory company put us out so we could earn some money in between big shows. And it was a musical history of Orange County that traveled around to all the schools in the district. I did it for 2 years, and the people in my second year were just John Copeland. Well, he wasn't in it, but his girlfriend, Diana Dare, and Jimmy Boris. And I just looked at us, I said, oh my God, we are a perfect cast for a Commedia for the Renaissance Fair. And so Jimmy, who's a doer and a shaker up, and he took it, and we had a script. We chose The Reeve's Tale from Chaucer's Canterbury Tales, and it was a perfect cast. And we just, so much fun. I think it was the most fun, the best show I've ever done at any of the fairs. I moved up here and I met Jim. We got married, and after we got married, they kept asking me to come down. I mean, the show was ongoing every year from then on at Southern Fair, and they kept asking me to come down and do it, and I did for a while, and then it just kind of had to stop. I don't know, because I had to
Can
take the
I
bus.
ask a few questions?
Yeah, sure.
I'd like to back the chronological train up a bit.
Mhm.
And you were interested in Commedia in junior high school?
Or early high school. That, I was still a kid.
That sort of tells me that you've always been interested in theater?
Oh, yes, yes. I used to do makeup plays, when I was a little kid and I directed everybody. I loved doing plays, and I was lucky enough to be in elementary school programs that provided, they had a director for us, and we did plays. If we wanted to, we could sign up and do the plays. And so I always did. I always did plays all the way through elementary school. And
What were some of your first roles that you remember with fondness?
well, I remember being in Emperor and the Nightingale,
Hmm.
and I played the clockmaker, and I was Chinese, and I had this long in back, and it was attached to a hat that was on my head. And so I went walking on, and my assistant, who was holding my braid, stopped before I did. And she pulled the hat off, and I just went, "You owe me for that," kind of thing. I was really, flying out of control at my assistant. So, and the audience loved it. So that was improvised, and so I liked improvisation. And then I loved doing that. And then the other show I really enjoyed doing is Hansel and Gretel, and I played Gretel, and it was a musical, and it was just, yeah, I loved it. It was great. So those are the two shows I did in elementary school that I really loved.
When you told your parents at one point, I want to be an actress, what was their reaction? Or what did they have different plans for your life than acting?
I think that they always knew. My dad was interested in theater, and he was a director and an actor. Just not anything big, but he did it with his lodge and stuff. And he loved theater, and we used to go to all the little theaters in San Francisco, the little tiny ones that I ended up performing in, sort of that kind of theater. And I grew up with theater and knowing about theater and loving it and wanting to do it the whole time. And my dad was very supportive of it. Oh, yeah, he was really proud. My mother, though, on the other hand, wanted me to be a teacher. And I wanted to just do theater. So that's what I did. And she used to say, "Don't you want to make some money? Don't you want to be out working in a real job?" I said, "This is a job. I'm getting paid for it. I'm really working." So she kind of bugged me for a while, but she was proud of things because I was a founder of Eureka Theater, which originally had been shorter players, which was my idea because I'm very small. And so I thought to myself, wow, if everybody on stage was relative height wise, all the same short people, then we would look normal. So all the short people this is at San Francisco State. So I put that out, and all the short people who were some very good actors came into the group, and we did some shows, and it was really great. I did not like the name Shorter Players, but everybody voted to name it that. And Woody Woodruff turned out to be famous in New York, but we always called him Woody because his last name was Woodruff. He directed a show there, and he did a lot of stuff with that company. And then eventually we moved into the church theater, and we built the theater down in their basement, and it was a great theater. We always had good audiences. And then it became, well, I left the theater and went to LA. And after that, it became Eureka Theater. And then everybody started auditioning for it. So it wasn't, it didn't last all that long for short people, but it sure worked. It really worked for a time.
Do you remember what your preferred name was?
No, I don't. I don't remember. I just wanted anything but that. But oh well.
So your mom was more impressed with your organizing and
Yep.
producing than, say, the actual acting on stage?
No, she was proud of me. I mean, I don't know.
Right.
She never liked me acting, but she was proud at the same time. I don't know. It was weird because anything that I accomplished, it's like anyone who would take me into the club, I don't want to be in that club, that thing. Thought because I had started Shorter Players, then it was kind of just play. and weren't doing anything important. And I remember when she came down to visit me at South Coast Repertory Theater, which is a real repertory theater, I mean, very professional, and we got paid. She came down to visit me and she said, "Oh, Marilyn, is this like shorter players? Like, this must be just as stupid and small as shorter players." I didn't know. This is like ACT, ACT. They have a theater company. She never could accept it, but she'd come to my shows. So I don't know. She was very strange, needless to say. And I wanted to play the fiddle. She made me play the piano. And so I started playing the fiddle when I was 50. She never allowed me near a fiddle, those kinds of things. But my dad was very supportive, and he was really supportive of shorter players and really proud of it and proud of me. And that's all I need.
One of the things that I got from talking to Jim, and this is really skipping around chronologically, the role that Commedia played in the raising of your kids.
Oh yeah. Well, first of all, I suppose he told you the story of how we got together.
No, he skipped straight to kids.
Oh, I can't believe he didn't tell you that. Okay. Well, we were both doing shows at Northern Fair, back-to-back shows on the same stage. And I thought he was cute, but the only thing he ignored me. And the only thing he ever said to me was to tell me to shut up because I was giggling backstage during his show. Of course, we were across the road from an ale stand where everybody was hooting and hollering, and the audience was drunk and they were making noise, but he had to yell at me. But anyway, so later on, I guess it was a couple of weekends later, we were supposed to be playing characters in the streets as well as on the stage. So I had a friend who was my daughter, and I was trying to get her married off. And one of the customers said, "Oh yes, I'll marry her." And then, we kind of planned it, and he went walking away. And then my daughter said, "Well, mother, now that we've found me a husband, we must find you one as well." And just then, here comes Jim toddling up the hill as old Pantalone, the miser, and he's toddling. And my friend said, "What about him?" And she grabbed him, and we did this whole thing of becoming, being betrothed and stuff. Then we kissed to seal our betrothal, and the rest is history. We were never apart after that. And then when we had our kids, well, I know that he told you about the babies being in the shows.
Yes.
And they were great. They were great. They did some really fun things. Like the second year that baby Bobby played the baby, Jim was holding him up for the curtain call. And he looked up and he called every animal doggy at that point. He looked up, he saw a bird. He went, "Doggy, doggy." The audience loved it. So we had some fun with them. I mean, it just was part of our life. I was born to play Columbina. I mean, that's most of what I played in my life in shows. Maids like Virgie in Saturday, Sunday, Monday at South Coast Rep. She was the Italian maid. And that's the role I really felt for. That's the role I really liked doing. And that was me. It just became me. So I am Columbina. And when I was teaching the kids Commedia, I got to tell them, well, I've been Columbina for about 40 years. I've been playing the same role for 40 years, but doing different things, but being the same character within different stories that we would make up. And they were interested in that.
What I'm interested in hearing is, what did you see in Bobby's life that being taught Commedia with his friends would fill in him?
Okay, well, he was used to Jim and myself doing Commedia, and he was always watching our shows. And we'd teach classes, and he'd come to the classes, and so would his brother Tommy when Tommy was old enough. And then I was directing a show called Bravo San Angelo, I think it was, at their elementary school. Tommy was in first grade, and Robert was in fifth grade. I got both those classes together. And, I let them choose what characters they wanted, and they were always right on. I mean, specifically, they chose who they were born to be. He said, "Well, I'll just do the props because he was very kind of nervous kid. He's a scientist, just interested in science, and that's all he wanted to do. And he was just embarrassed to get up there and have his mom direct him in a play. So I said, okay, you can do the props, that's fine. Then we had this opening. The characters introduced themselves, and Capitano was a great character. Capitano was being played by one of Robert's friends, and at the last minute, he couldn't make it to a really important rehearsal, and he wasn't that interested in it anyway, even though his dad was from Italy. And so I had Robert fill in for him. And after that, Robert wanted to play Capitano in that, right there. He was the beginning of the show. He was great. And he did a fencing scene, and his little brother, Tommy, who had a counterpart. The kid that played the other Capitano from 5th grade had a brother who was in 1st grade with Tommy. And both the brother and Tommy wanted to be Capitano too. So we had these tall, older Capitanos and these little tiny Capitanos. They were together, and they were in a sword fight together, and it just worked really fun. It was fun. I think anything that in Commedia like that, that's why it's really free and loose, and it always works out. It always seems to work. So I let Robert be Capitano, and he was the star Capitano, and he had to talk and blah, blah, blah. And one day he came up to Jim and me and said, "Are we school famous? We're school famous." That's a good phrase. Everybody in school knows it. And then Tommy was always an actor. Always. He was born a comedian. And when he was this tall, he would take his Mr. Potato Head glasses and put them on and put the Mr. Potato Head hat on his head, and he'd take a ruler and make it into a cane, and he'd go around on the floor going, "I'm an old man. I'm an old man." Just dying because he was just doing it naturally. I mean, he didn't know, but he wanted to play the old man, and he had it down. I think he was only 2.5 or 3 years old. He had it down. It was amazing. So
when you teach Commedia to children, what is that first thing that you show them to get them excited about this art form?
I tell them about each character. I show them pictures of the characters, and then I talk about the animals, and I show them how the physical behavior mirrors their animal, like Pantalon, the duck. So they were getting an idea of, I also introduced them to masks. And then I wanted to show them how well the animal moves would help them, how this would work. So I had this little scene where I had Puccinella and I had Arlecchino. Puccinella is a day-old chick, and he eats. He eats all the time. He eats anything and everything and all the time. And Arlecchino, his animals are a pig, a cat, and a monkey. So I had him, the first thing was he noticed the big sausage or whatever it was that Puccinella was eating. He noticed that sausage, and he became the cat. And he snuck over, and he did all the cat moves that I directed, really like the shoulder blades going like this, and just snuck over, and just he's about to attack, and he wiggles his butt and grabs the salami and runs away as the monkey. I got the salami. He's running away with the salami. And then he sits down and he becomes a pig when he's eating the salami. And I said, okay, can you guys see what this will give you? This gives you so much. You don't even have to talk. You can, tell a whole story just with your character. And everybody wanted to do that exercise. Everybody in all the classes wanted to get up and do that exercise. And that was great. And we talked about it. And then we got going with scenarios. We talked about scenarios. Some of them made up their own scenarios. Well, first of all, I had them choose characters that they wanted to be. I did not cast. I let them choose the character they wanted to be. If a boy wanted to be a girl, he could be a girl. If a girl wanted to be a boy, she could be a boy. And in fact, I had this kid in my first class he had been a problem child. He was doing, I think, fifth grade over. He's one of those kids that just couldn't contain himself. And I think he wanted to get my goat. So he said, I want to play Isabella. I said, fine, you can play Isabella. That's great. So he played Isabella in a ball gown, and he was perfect, and he was so funny. I would crack up every time I saw him. But what was interesting is I always told the classes that I said, remember when you were a little kid and some of you may have made up stories and then acted them out, because that's what I did when I was a little kid. And I said, that's what we're doing, except you're really connected to your character. And so you behave the way your character behaves, you speak the way they speak, you encounter people the way that character would encounter them. Anyway, so at graduation, which I know Jim told you about, that the fifth grade that I directed was really great up on stage. That kid got up and he said, my favorite teacher was Marilyn because she taught me how to be a child. And I just burst into tears, because this was a kid who was trouble. And I'm getting goosebumps thinking about it right now. But he was perfect. I did find that the kids that were the most problem in classroom, that wouldn't listen, that got up and ran around or just created trouble and didn't learn, and they were the best Commedia actors. They were absolutely the best. They totally took it and ran with it. And so they were my favorite actors. Now, I had kids who were the little angels and the teacher's pets, and they're talking like this, and they're like this. And I go, okay, in this class, you are using your outside voices. Outside voices only in this class. Never use your classroom voice. Only outside voices. And so I'd have these girls, they'd introduce themselves. My name is Marilyn. And I'd say, no, use your outside voice. Say it, just scream it, like you would scream when you're playing outside. And they go, my name is Marilyn. And it was so funny. Eventually, I ended up at Enola Maxwell Middle School of the Arts, which was an underserved inner city middle school where my son Tommy wanted to go. It was not a good school. It catered to the projects were on the other side of the hill, and all the project kids went to this school. And so some of the kids that had been in Tommy's classes, the parents, we all got together. We said, we're going to put them in this school because the city and people are giving enrichment to this school, and maybe, we can help it. So I ended up teaching Commedia and directing shows with them. There was one kid who I'm sure had been a crack baby, because he couldn't sit still, and he would be in the theater. They had a really nice theater, and he'd jump. He'd go jumping on the tops of the theater seats from top to top to top. And I was afraid he was going to, I was like, oh my God. And when I was talking to the class, sometimes I would hold him like this. I'd just hold him like this. And he would calm down and he'd listen. I mean, usually those kids don't want you to touch them, but this kid wanted it because he listened and he heard everything. And this kid was very funny. He was so funny. And I really wanted him to do something with that. And he was great in the play that I directed, The Tempest. It was a takeoff on The Tempest. And then I had a girl who was in 8th grade. The 8th graders are so much more grown up than the 6th graders and the 7th graders. It's so funny. I mean, she was like a teenager. And she was just perfect. I just loved her so much. She was a good performer. And we usually don't do scripts, but I wrote them a little script, just so they'd have an idea. And she couldn't read. So, they were reading from the script, and one of her friends said, she doesn't read. She can't read. But she was great at improvisation. And so I had experiences like that. And I talked to people at School of the Arts, the High School of the Arts, because they had somebody who would come over and check the kids out at Enola Maxwell to see who would be good to come and audition for Soda. And so I talked to her and I said, look, I've got these 2 students. And I told them about them both. And I told them about the older girl because she just was so impressive. She impressed me so much. I said, I really, really want her to go to this school. And she said, well, we have special classes for students like that don't read and stuff, and they can continue with their arts there. And the problem was, it was up to the parents. They had to fill out papers. They had to bring them to meetings and auditions before the kids got into the school. I just couldn't take them. I wanted to, but it was just impossible for me to take each kid over to Soda and help them do the stuff to get into the school. All I could do was talk to the person who was in charge of that. So I don't think any of them. No, one of them got into Soda as a dancer. So I was really proud of that. I was really happy for him. But I was very sad for the other kids. They were just in a different world, and it was hard for them. I drove one of the little girls home one day, and she was hungry, and I said, okay, when you go into your house, she said, nobody's home, nobody's home. And I said, well, when you go into your house, um, eat something like a banana and a glass of milk, or find something, anything, piece of bread and milk and fruit. And she said, we don't have anything. It was heartbreaking because these kids were so wonderful in theater, and they loved it so much. In fact, kids were running away from their classes. They were ditching their classes and coming and hiding behind the seats to be in the Commedia class in the theater. And it was like, running away to join the circus. Something has to be done with that. I don't know. But all I can do is hope that they took their love of it and did something with it. I don't know. I didn't follow up on them because I was teaching, and it was a
I
lot of
have
work.
another question.
Yeah. I have one more thing I want to say about
Oh,
that.
please do.
We shared the campus with a charter school, and they were kids that had wealthy parents and no learning disabilities, no problems, no, they were in class. They were terrible. They were so bad in Commedia dell'arte. They could have cared less. And I preferred the inner city kids over those kids, way preferred them. I just want to say that because they were just popping. They were great. The inner city kids from the projects and stuff. We had one little boy who lived in the projects over the hill. He loved being in theater. And I understood that because being in theater is like being in your home. It becomes a home for some people. It became a home for me. And he would stay with us. He would help us. He would do everything he could for us. And we stayed until midnight in the theater setting up for our show. And he stayed the whole time and ran for stuff for us. And we said, don't your parents need you? Aren't they worried about you being out until midnight? And he said, nah, they don't worry. They don't care. So he'd stay there with us in the theater till midnight. And that was what he wanted to do. That's what he was spending his time doing, which I loved. I stopped teaching there. They turned Denola Maxwell into a different kind of school. I can't remember what it was. So we stopped teaching there. And one day I was sitting out in front with some of the charter school teacher and a friend of mine. And this boy came walking by, and I said, hey, hi. And he said, hi. And he had a friend with him. And as I went inside the school, his friend said, who was that? And this kid said, that's my Commedia teacher. And he was so proud. I just, it just warmed my heart. These kids, they just took to it like ducks to water, as they say. But anyway, go ahead and ask your question. I'm sorry.
No, you're doing great. As you know, I've just recently talked to John and Jim, and they talked about masks and how working with masks is both liberating and frightening for some. How do you integrate sort of masks into your acting and teaching?
Well, for one thing, the women in the Commedia don't wear masks. Columbina doesn't wear a mask. Maybe in the 18th century they wore these little loops or whatever they're called. But Isabella and Columbina don't wear masks. But the kids had to get to know about them. The kids loved them. They loved looking at them and trying them on, and they all wanted to mess around with them. So they had seen pictures of the characters and stuff. I kind of told them, nobody's going to know who you are, so you can do whatever you want on stage and not be afraid. And this is one thing, maybe it was mean for me to tell these kids, but some of them were so embarrassed to be doing commedia on the stage. And they were like, oh, but I don't need it. And I said, look, if you go up there and you're like this and then you're going to embarrass yourself. But if you go out there and just yell and do who your character is, and you don't have to have the right words, you just have to know who you are and what is important to you. And then people will appreciate you. But otherwise, if you're going to go and think, people are going to feel sorry for you, and they didn't want that. So the masks, I think, they got to make their own masks too. I talked to the art teacher. This was at Clarendon. The boys went to school. And I talked to the art teacher, and she taught them how to make their own masks. Not the leather ones, but I taught them about the characters, and they had chosen their characters. And so we had a meeting with the art teacher, and she learned all the stuff. So she had them as a project. She had them make their own masks. And they were great. They were great, and they wore them. No problem. They were really great.
Aside from your mask, did you assign any other homework?
And their homework was to go out and watch animals, like watch their cats move, or go to the zoo, the petting zoo, and see the pigs and everything and the ducks and stuff. I said, watch those animals. That is your homework, and I expect you to do it. And if you can't go out to the zoo, if your parents won't take you to the zoo, go online to see these animals. It's really important. So they did.
What was the most popular animal to imitate or mimic?
Well, it's hard to say because the animal's so connected with the characters, and the characters were so connected with the kids. The kids chose their characters from who they were. I mean, every single kid that chose a character, they were right on. I was going, oh, perfect, perfect. So I think their animals, probably their favorite, like the kids loved playing the duck. They also loved playing Capitano because he's the rooster and he strut around like a rooster. And then there was Zani. Zani was totally insane. And I told them, this character is completely crazy. And he had the funniest walk. The kids loved doing it. It was like knees coming up, and he's going, I'm coming as fast as I can. But I kept my weight down when I was teaching this class, I'll tell you. So I think maybe Zani was the favorite for everybody to do. They thought he was really funny. And he was. And we had a girl play Zani in one of the shows, and she was great. I think she was the only Zani in the show, too. But she had this voice. She changed her voice. She had this funny voice, and she was great.
What kind of feedback did you get from the parents of your young students / actors?
Well, it things like boys playing girls. There was this kid from an Hispanic family, and the son. He was the son, and he wanted to play Isabella. So I let him play Isabella. He was hysterical. I had him say, I broke a nail, that kind of thing, he was so right. His parents laughed hysterically. And then there was a case where these boys wanted to play Isabella in another show, and the mother said to me, do I have to be worried? I said, you know what I mean? Do I have to be worried about my son? I said, God, no. He's acting. He's a comedian. It was just so So some people kind of looked askance at Commedia, and of course we only did the violence and the scatological humor and not the sex stuff. I had a kid at that other that the school that I didn't like, um, who didn't want to be in our class because we made fart jokes. We had kids farting. He was a poet and he wanted to write and he thought it was terrible. So of course he went to a private school, and lo and behold, first thing they're teaching him is Commedia. And he came back to the old school, and I saw him, and he said, "They're teaching Commedia dell'arte at my school," and he was part of it. And so he learned that it's not just fart jokes either. The fart jokes are funny, but it's comedy, and it's old comedy. So these 500-year-old jokes still work. And we did have a teacher also. Jim and I directed a group at Soda to do a school tour of Commedia. And there was a fart, Pantalone farts. And this teacher went up to poor Pantalone, this kid. I mean, she goes up to his Pantalone. She gave him hell for farting and saying, "This is what I think it was, this is what we don't want our children to do. If they see you doing it, they're going to do it all the time, blah, 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 blah." So he was really freaked out and he didn't want to do the farting. And we did the show finally at Soda, and he did not do the fart joke. I was so mad. Well, mainly I was mad at that stupid teacher. I mean, what an idiot. But he just was afraid to do it. And so the poor Columbina, she's behind him. She's supposed to be hanging up clothes. And when he farts, she didn't know what to do because that was a cue for her to pass out. So, but she handled it just fine. They were great little actors, those guys. I guess it was a lesson we should have taken on and taught them about people who say you can't fart in front of an audience, and how to take it when somebody complains to you. We just kind of let it go, and there he was not doing it because he was just freaked out. The thing is that there was always something that happened because of the fart. There was always, somebody would pass out, or everybody in the room would go, ah, or something that went along with the fart that was funny. It wasn't just walking around and farting, although that would be pretty funny too, come to think of it. But people don't have a sense of humor. I don't know. And Commedia is rough. It has rough edges for people who are used to going to ACT. I don't know. It's just different.
Well, that's it for this part one of Fair Folk at Work interview with Marilyn Letchworth. Questions or comments? Please email them to me at djng@earthlink.net. If you'd like me to pass along a message to Marilyn, also send them to me at djng@earthlink.net. Look for part two, but that's it for this time. Thanks for listening. See ya later. Bye-bye.